This is Jennifer Gonzalez welcoming you to episode 173 of the Cult of Pedagogy podcast. In this episode, we're going to look at how ELA and special ed teachers can collaborate to produce fantastic student writing. For over 7 years, I was a middle school English language arts teacher. English language arts, or ELA, as we often abbreviate it, includes reading, writing, speaking, and listening skills. All of these are complex skills to teach, but in my experience, the most challenging one was writing. That challenge was intensified when it came to students with learning differences. Every year, about 10% of my total students were identified as having some kind of learning difference. These students were given extra support, outlined in their IEPs, in the form of accommodations, separate resource classes, and sometimes specialists who worked alongside them in my class. This framework of support had mixed results, and usually this depended on who filled the role of specialist. Some did an outstanding job of providing support and communicating to me what students needed, while others took more of a back seat to whatever I had planned. The work they did with students was kind of a mystery to me. And then there was me. My training in special education consisted of one 3-credit course as an undergraduate, and I barely remembered any of it. In all the years that I had students with learning differences in my classes, I never got any more skilled or knowledgeable about what I should be doing to support their learning. Unfortunately for these students, their writing showed little improvement as a result of the time they spent in my class. Today's episode would have helped me so much. I'm talking with Sarah Riggs Johnson, a learning specialist who has collaborated with classroom teachers for years and has figured out what really works when it comes to improving the writing of students with learning differences, specific strategies, mindsets, even scheduling decisions that have an impact. Had I known about these, I feel confident I would have been able to get so much more out of my relationship with specialists in my own classes, and we could have helped our students truly shine as writers. My hope is that these tips can help you make that happen with your students. In a blog post she's written for Cult of Pedagogy, Sarah shares 11 key components of these partnerships. We'll discuss all 11 in our conversation today. Before we start, I would like to thank Scholastic Scope magazine for sponsoring this episode. Scholastic Scope is a powerful middle school resource that builds stronger, more engaged readers and writers. All year long, your class receives fresh ELA content in the format of your choice, print, digital, or both. Your students will love reading Scope's thrilling stories, discovering new genres, watching amazing videos, and writing about everything they've learned. And you'll love that every story and activity builds core ELA skills, from summarizing to synthesizing. Visit scholastic.com/scope to learn more and use code 2021 to save 20%. That's scholastic.com/scope. Support also comes from ListenWise, a fantastic collection of NPR podcasts, age appropriate for grades 2 through 12. The podcasts come with easy-to-use lessons designed to build students' background knowledge and vocabulary while engaging them on important current events topics. It's great practice for meeting listening and speaking standards. With ListenWise Premium, you get built-in comprehension supports, automatically scored quizzes, interactive transcripts so students can read along as they listen, and more. Use audio stories as an equity lever to reach all your students, including those reading below grade level. Individual and school trials are available when you sign up for free at listenwise.com. Now here's my interview with Sarah Riggs Johnson about how ELA and special ed teachers can work together to improve student writing. Hey, Sarah, welcome to the podcast.
Hi there. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm such a fan.
This has been, thank you. This has been a really embarrassingly long time coming. I don't even remember when you first reached out with this idea. I think I put out a call for guest posts. Were you on that list of people that submitted when I said, hey?
Yes. And that was pre-pandemic. So
It was
no worries. It's not like the whole world hasn't changed drastically in the
Yeah.
past 18 months. So,
So we're finally like meeting and actually talking about this. So before we even get into what we're going to talk about, just tell me a little bit about who are you as an educator?
okay. So my title right now is academic support counselor.
Mm,
I like to call myself a learning specialist. It varies so much, what a special educator is called by state, by training. I'm a national board certified. I think my certification is exceptional needs specialist for mild to moderate learning disabilities. So a narrow section of what special educators do and who they serve. Um, I have always worked in independent schools, and I realize we're going to talk about collaboration. There's some privilege in how I've gotten to make my own rules in terms of how I serve students. So the way that I like to describe it is I support students who struggle academically at the schools I've worked at, and regardless of why they struggle, I try to open my door to everyone.
got it. So the specific, speaking of specific slices of things, we're really going to be talking about one specific kind of support that you give to students, and this is about supporting ELA teachers or language arts teachers with student writing. And this is near and dear to my heart because I was a middle school language arts teacher and taught plenty of kids who had IEPs and all kinds of other things. And got some support from, the special ed teachers, but I was really never well educated on what they could be doing and what they should be doing and what the possibilities were. And I'm not sure what their training was either. I think everybody did the best they could. But I think with an episode like what we're going to do today, I think this would really inform that kind of partnership everywhere, and give people on both sides of that partnership sort of ideas for how they can make that work even better. So I
Absolutely.
think this fills a real need. So before we get into all the different tips that you're going to be providing, let's talk about the the child with a learning difference and why is writing especially challenging for those kids.
Okay, so um, I think about writing as sort of the most complex task when it comes to the hierarchy of how language and literacy skills develop.
Hmm.
You think about oral language, and first comes listening, and then students learn to speak. And that's the reason a 2-year-old can, understand, but maybe not articulate. And then you learn to read, and in tandem, you learn to write. And it's complex because it involves all these simultaneous processes where you have to hold, you have to simultaneously consider spelling and sentence structure and handwriting, which we know is hard for some students, and then later typing if you're learning to type, and organizing your ideas and what you actually want to say. You have to keep that in your working memory. So there's just a lot of different processing going on. And often with students, I'll draw them a picture of a bottle and kind of explain that some of these things sometimes get stuck in the bottleneck because you're doing so much to try to get your ideas on the page that maybe spelling falls by the wayside for the student who struggles with language processing, especially.
Mhm.
Um, Other types of students with ADHD often struggle with sort of the organizational, the executive functioning aspects of writing,
Hmm.
keeping track of what they've said already, and then where they want to, seeing where they want to go, how they want to end a piece of writing, sometimes adding enough detail, and then students, on the with autistic spectrum disorders often struggle with understanding writing from the reader's perspective or what the teacher's expectation is. So there's all sorts of strategies we can employ, especially together working with an ELA teacher, that I've been able to really help students grow as writers.
Yeah. It's funny too because everything that you're describing is stuff that makes writing a challenge for all students. It's
Right.
it's my least favorite part of what I do every day, and I kind of make a living from it. And it's
Right.
still, whenever it comes down to actually having to write, it's like
Right. 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 Right.
it's painful. It's
Yeah.
so with kids who have learning differences, there will be pieces of that normal struggle that are even more challenging for them because of the way that their brains are wired.
Right. Right. Right.
So what you've done, your years of collaboration have sort of taught you, some stuff that makes your collaboration with ELA teachers work really well to get good writing from these kids with learning differences. And I would love it if you could even tell the story. This is all going to be, by the way, you've written a really, really nice blog post that we're going to be putting on the site that's going to synthesize all of these ideas that we share today. So this is almost just like a duplicate of that. But it starts with a story about, what was his name? Jack.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit
Little
about
blue Jack. Yeah.
the story. We're going to call him Jack. The story of him, which is a really good illustration of this kind of problem that you're talking about.
So I give an anecdote about a student, and he really could be a conglomeration of all kinds of students, but who were working in writer's workshop class. I'm pushing into the classroom to support certain students, and he has this great idea. We're talking about narrative writing, so really zooming in on a small moment. And most kids choose to write about, the time they won the soccer game or the time they
Yeah.
broke their arm. He decided he wanted to write about this funny interaction that he eavesdropped with his sister on an airplane where two strangers end up kissing or making out on this airplane, and how weird, it's so awkward, and we were giggling. And he was a really funny kid. It was I just was like, this could be awesome. But he, had learning differences that really impacted his productivity in writing. So for 45 minutes, you came back to him, and all he had on the page was one time on a plate with every single word misspelled. I think his official diagnosis is dyslexia. He had disordered spelling all over the place. And so my, story is to sort of illustrate how his ELA teacher and I worked in tandem to both intervene with, in terms of all these mechanical aspects of writing that he struggled with, and to help him develop his comedic voice and to teach him that he had something to say. And like, arguably one of the best ideas, I thought, in the class, or most original, I shouldn't say the best, but in terms of his writing piece.
I love that was a priority to develop his comedic voice, because when I think about teaching kids that age, I mean, a lot of times we're just trying to get something on the paper and get
Right.
something done. And so to really hone in on, like, you have a gift here and let's develop that,
Right.
is just a much, I don't know, it's a loftier goal, and it's more
Right.
fun and
Yes.
really shows him how he's special in the world.
And the teacher on her own, I mean, I totally understand. She doesn't have time to sit with him and get the story out. She has to move the classroom along in the workshop. So that's where that, collaborative piece with me became so important in getting him to make progress and to write.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through, you've got 11 essential elements of effective collaboration between ELA teachers and specialists. And before we start, you have kind of a disclaimer that you wanted to share about these ideas.
Yeah. Well, I'm always conscious of when it's hard to write and to speak about serving students with learning differences, disabilities. One is because the language, labels, and we could get into a whole nother podcast about, what we call and the value of, like, is it harmful to label students in a certain way? Are we overgeneralizing? Are we stereotyping? And I'm just always conscious of that.
I've been sitting here for the last 10 minutes, like, having anxiety over the fact that I used the word normal 10 minutes ago. And now I'm like, do I go back and re-record that? Do I just say something? Because I know that was not a good
I
word
know
to
it's
use.
really hard. It's really hard. It's really hard to talk about people because all people are different. I love
Yeah.
this word neurodiversity that people are
Mm,
using now, and realizing that, there's these constellations. I do use labels because I like to teach students that these are sort of umbrella terms that, even no two people with dyslexia look
mm,
look the same, have the same, skill wise, everything. So, um, but I think there's power in sort of understanding. We've learned so much about how the brain works and these sort of characteristics that, helping them sort of build a positive identity around those, I think has been really effective, at least in my practice. And I understand too when a student feels like it's super stigmatizing. I'll work around that and build comfort with their family and with them. But the other piece that I always mention as a disclaimer, and I touched on this a little bit, is just um, that I know that special educators, especially my colleagues in public schools, have a whole nother realm of what they have to manage in terms of compliance and IEPs and progress
mm,
monitoring, all those
mm-hmm.
cycles. So I'm highly aware of that. I'm like speaking from a place of privilege and getting to sort of build this model of collaboration and how I serve students. I hope there's like useful, nuggets in here for everyone, even if you feel like you're really limited by your role in your school and probably want to roll your eyes at us a little.
But there's always pieces that can
Yeah.
be pulled in, and maybe even things like this can help in the effort to push back a little bit more on some of that stuff that's so restrictive.
Mhm,
You
mhm.
know, if we can see how is it working in a place that doesn't have as many restrictions, it might move the needle more in that direction in the public schools too.
Right, right.
Yeah. So let's get started. So, what is
Okay.
the first thing that you have found to be really essential for making this kind of partnership work?
So common planning time. It's like a weirdly simple thing and a weirdly complicated thing because I realize it involves the schedule, and anything
Mm-hmm.
involving scheduling in schools is difficult. But I think one of the best gifts an administrator ever gave to me when I was starting teaching was a middle school schedule printed out. Here's a blank template of your schedule, but you'll notice there's two periods that are decided, and that's common planning time with your fifth grade team of ELA teachers and your sixth grade team of ELA
Mm-hmm.
teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's mandatory. So,
Yeah.
like, she expected us to sit down together every week. And I, at the time, obviously didn't know what the value of that would end up being, but it just, I mean, totally transformed me as a teacher. And I would think they would all say them as well. We would meet weekly in my office, and coffee and laptops and books, and just talk about what are we teaching this week. And there was
Mm-hmm.
obviously a lot what we did last year. All those things played into it as
Yeah.
well. But we could problem solve around specific students. We could analyze student work. We could take the writing workshop in a different direction. There was so much value in having that set time together.
This is at least the second time that I have heard the same thing, and it was from somebody else who was talking about co-teaching in general,
Mhm.
and they said that that was also the number one thing. And so this really does seem to keep coming up
Yeah.
as something that school leaders need to pay attention to if they want
There's
this to
times
work.
you don't feel like it. So the fact,
Yeah.
like you have a bad week, there's stuff going on at home. There's there were times when everybody's just so busy and report cards are due, but having to do it, almost having it
Mm,
be that a routine that was consistent was, I think, part of what made it so effective, because that time was built in instead of you trying to find it somewhere else where it probably would get pushed down to do
It
it.
seems like there's also more value beyond simply the planning of the instruction too, that
Yeah,
just that frequent time together and forming that trust and that bond with the
absolutely.
other teacher, because you can't do much together if you don't know and trust each other pretty well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I learned so much about teaching in general because, again, well, we'll talk about this next, look at it
Yeah.
from a different lens. So, absolutely.
Yeah. So even if there are certain times when you have the common planning and you end up just talking about, your spouses and,
Right.
it's
Right.
still worth it.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, totally.
So then what is number two? Let's segue right into that.
So number two is coming at the collaboration from an equal playing field. I think a lot of times there's anxiety in working together. I've had, you know, classroom teachers tell me, I always feel like the specialist is in an evaluative role, like you're not doing this right, you need to do this for
Mm,
this student. And when there's that sort of weird power imbalance, and maybe vice versa too, and that I don't know how to teach writer's workshop on my own.
right.
Um, it doesn't work as well, I think, if there's, that sort of defensiveness. So the way that I like to think about it is we're both, just coming at it from a different lens. The learning specialist looks at the classroom from a psychologist's perspective, and that like their role is to figure out how each student is functioning, or an individual student is functioning, and to support that student individually. And the teacher is the sociologist. The ELA teacher is responsible for how the group is progressing and how the
Mm,
group is doing. And sometimes those roles like are in conflict with what needs to happen next, or maybe seem out of touch. But I found like really great compromises come out of that, and just that benefit really all the students. And I'm always cognizant of like I am not an island and knowing what's best for
mm.
students. And when you communicate that, it's like everybody's defenses go down, and you feel it's got to be part of a team.
Yeah.
We got
So
to.
are there sort of practical things that you can do to facilitate that equal partnership apart from just having that mindset?
Yeah, well, one thing we always tried to do is I like to rotate through students, in like if I'm pushing into the classroom, I really try to
Hmm.
work with the teacher to plan, like maybe I work with this group today, and you take the group of kids, that are struggling, or this student, you check in with these students that I normally am there to serve.
Hmm.
Maybe I'll take the most, talented writers in the class. And that's good for all of us. One thing, I think it helps the kids see the learning specialists in a non-stigmatized, like
Hmm.
they're there for that kid kind of way.
Yes. Hmm.
Because that, still happens, and kids are always thinking about that. I hope that they see me as another teacher in the classroom, and a support and a resource for everyone. Um, but it also just, it's more flexible. It lets me understand where other students in the class are, and it gives me ideas for how to support those students who are struggling. So being flexible in that way, I offer myself up usually to the ELA teacher for anything. Sometimes we develop like a graphic organizer together that would help a student, and then they're like, well, actually this would help everybody. So
Hmm.
we figure out how to work it into instructing. um, I try to ask if I can help too with just some of the fun things that go on in the classroom, like a writing exposition or a competition. Like, can I be a judge? Can I come to the party? Can I go on the field trip? Because that helps you sort of be, just more of a regular presence. And it models
Mm.
that like collaborative relationship too for students, which I think is valuable in itself.
Yeah. It sort of takes you out of the role because I think about that sometimes, that the learning specialist in the room is sort of almost like this strange adult who just shows up every day.
Yeah.
But if the kids don't have a relationship with you,
Right.
then that never changes. And they get to know their regular classroom teacher very well
Right.
in most cases. And so to help the whole class get to know you as a person,
Right.
that's huge. I think
Yeah.
that's a really, really key piece there.
I do. I do in terms of the relationships. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what is number 3?
Um, reading student work together. So analyzing student work together. So this can happen sort of organically. ELA teacher will come to my office, like, look at this draft. I don't know where to go with this. Like,
Yeah.
how do I
Yeah.
get feedback on this? And, or we'll decide to actually go through like a student work protocol where we come to that collaborative meeting with a piece of work we want to talk about or get others feedback on in terms of how to help the student. But it just having the two sets of eyes, you really start to see different strengths and weaknesses, and kind of work off each other. Like there are times when the teacher will be like, I got nothing for how to get them to expand this idea or something, and I'll think of something, and then vice versa, where I'll kind of be stuck with, I don't know really where else to go, and then he or she will work with that student. So.
Yeah. Is this, and when you say student work, are you talking about all the students or primarily your kids with the learning differences that
So,
you're supporting?
it tends to end up being more, but I mean, if you can do it for all the students, I think that's a way. I mean, I often think about too, like, how do we help those high flyers grow and progress and not be
Yeah.
bored? So we look at their writing as well together and think about
Okay.
like, how do we almost give them enrichment in a way that they're writing on a level that they could become a writer. So what do professional writers do in this,
Right.
when you can kind of
Right.
get,
So maybe if time is
yeah,
scarce, maybe it's a matter of working with just the struggling students writing, but maybe throwing in,
right,
rotating in every once in a while some of the work from the other kids just
exactly.
to
Yeah.
get a sense for where everybody is.
Yeah. You got to kind of work with what you can do, but
Yeah.
it's valuable every once in a while to sit down and look at students writing together.
So number 4 is
Number 4 is, I think, it's more about feedback. So practicing sort of less feedback, especially with students with learning differences that really impact their writing. There tends to be that cognitive overload already. So I think this used to happen with, like, they get handed back a paper that's just covered in red ink.
mm,
And now it's like they get a paper on Google Docs that's just like 1,000 comments and highlights, and they have to, like,
yeah.
that visual tracking is hard. They have to figure out
Yes.
where this comment applies to and how to change the sentence. So I really advocate for giving little chunks of feedback at a time. And it makes more sense when we've gone through the whole scope of, working through a writing piece together, because the kids learn that, like, they're going to keep getting feedback, but it's going to be, usually a piece of significant praise for something they've done well, because I think they definitely need that positive, to feel like they have something to say and they're in this. And then they also, 2 or 3 suggestions for revision, and I'll usually prioritize, like, we'll prioritize, working towards whatever the learning outcome was, or the
Yeah.
goal of the mini lesson was, progress, clarity, and the student's voice over thing. Like, I don't work, like, let's not go through all your spelling errors until later, because it's
Yes.
just too overwhelming. And I want to
Mhm.
work on really developing the essence of your writing first, and we can go back
I'm
and do the
right there with you. Yeah. I think this is good advice for anybody who
yeah,
teaches writing to anybody is
yeah,
you can't throw everything at them
right,
all at once. It's too overwhelming for
no,
everybody.
right,
Yeah. Okay. So number 5 is another one of my favorites. Some of these I feel like are just really good ideas for
yes,
anybody who teaches writing
yeah,
to anybody, but you've found them to be especially useful
yes.
with kids with learning differences. Okay. So 5 is really my favorite.
So using models,
Hmm.
um, you, I I can't even, I can't say enough about it. When you,
Yeah.
and ELA teachers really help me with this because they tend to be more widely read than I am and more current in what they've read. I try to keep up with some YA lit and stuff every summer, but they, they really know. And if not, then go to your media specialist and ask them for ideas. Whoever is like really into reading the things your kids are reading, to pull interesting examples. And this could be also student writing. So if you have,
Mm-hmm.
Exceptional pieces from past years, I save those and de-identify them. We can use those as examples to analyze together. But also, I think it's helpful to pull samples from real authors of, persuasive writing. And it could be simple. It could be just the first sentence, like a lead
Mm-hmm.
into a narrative, or if you're talking about like research writing, like a good example of a quote sandwich. How do you explain an expert's opinion
Yeah.
in your
Yeah.
writing? So you have like develop a kind of a catalog of good mentor texts and writing samples, models to show students. Um, it for the student with a learning difference, it helps them sort of build a foundation, a schema
Mm-hmm.
for the language you're trying to develop in terms of written language. And you can, I mean, sometimes I'll use, I don't want to call them negative examples, but like examples
Mm.
of kind of like, where would this fall in the rubric?
Yeah.
Not
Less
well, and that
effective
helps.
use of, yeah.
That can help too. So, um, yes, absolutely.
Okay, use of models, fantastic. I'm right there with you. I think anybody who's attempting to teach writing without ever showing models is missing huge,
Yeah,
huge, help right there.
yeah.
And so this is another almost kind of models is number 6.
Yeah, word lists. So I also like to have like very specific word lists for students to go through. So and particularly when we're working on descriptive writing, but also for analytical writing, like you can have a list of transitional phrases. So this
Mm-hmm.
demonstrates why, or according to, blah blah blah, so that
Mm-hmm.
students, especially again students with language-based learning issues, have these smaller scale models of how to say something. And I like to do it in a list because I like to actually sit with them and go through, like, let's go through some of these and try to find the perfect fit, because it gives me an opportunity to talk about like the nuances in meaning. Like
Mm-hmm.
with a younger student, you're writing poetry and you say, let's find another word for the word blue that's a more specific blue to what you're trying
Yeah.
to describe. And you're trying out aquamarine and royal and what, getting them to, it's really, really powerful. You do this over time, and then you notice they access the word lists on their own, and they just feel like a poet.
Yeah.
When before, a lot of times these students will say like, I hate writing, I'm not good at it. So, um, yeah. And I also think both using models and the word list, you can build vocabulary that way. I see
Mm-hmm.
it reinforce reading comprehension sometimes, because
Mm.
what you're doing is looking, taking another view of something that you read and looking at it from a writer's perspective. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I can't say enough about both those things.
I'm going to review what we have so far. I'm just going to go through the list because I
Sure.
like to do this, especially for people that are just listening to
Yeah.
just what we've gone through so far. So, number 1 was a common planning time. 2 is seeing this as an equal partnership. 3 is reading student work together. 4 is practicing less is more. 5 is the use of models. And 6 is the use of word lists. So, what is number 7?
So we called number 7 staying together, but essentially what tends to happen a lot is a student who is really struggling with a writing piece and maybe like really off the mark in terms of where his peers are, her peers are. Um, the tendency is to be sort of like, well, why don't you take this student and do your own writing lesson? with the student. And I really think students who struggle learn way more than we think from their peers, even when their writing skill is not comparable. And there are things that you can do with the specialist to kind of get that student ready for peer feedback or for the next mini lesson. Maybe this is where some accommodations come in, like let's have the student dictate some of it to me, or dictate using an app, or there's so much we can do now with speech to text and text to speech. Or let's, even if it's just a timing thing, like, I just taught a writer's workshop with my partner, and we realized that one student was really behind where she needed to be for good peer feedback. We also, wanted her to feel good about the piece before she showed it to her classmates. So we just kind of worked our schedule so that I had time to conference individually with her before we went into peer feedback, and she had a piece that she, could work with. So just sort of realizing that I think it's great for students, even who are really struggling writers, to hear their peers working through their own pieces and their own challenges and work, and there's value in that.
Okay. I think that's good. And I do think a lot of times the tendency is to just like remove the student so that you can kind of concentrate on what they're doing. But there's a lot of value in that surrounding influence.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. If it's scaffolded, like obviously I don't want to make a student feel terrible about themselves. So there is times then that you remove the student so you can conference with them and help them develop their writing. But I think I wouldn't do that and have them miss a mini lesson or miss peer conferencing. Those aspects are important.
Okay. Got it. I'm glad you added that, because I think that's an important distinction in terms of making the decisions. Okay. So what is number 8?
Number 8 is something that I do then. So when I have the opportunity to meet with a student in like a session to do some intervention work, and I guess in a public school this would be like when the student has minutes with me in a pullout, I tend to try to use what the student's doing in the writing classroom to structure the kind of intervention we're doing. So usually it's, word study, spelling. Intervention routines can be somewhat boring because they're like just highly repetitive, teaching you word patterns, or doing dictated sentence work, or working on, sentence boundaries or punctuation. So why not take, if the class is working on persuasive essays, I think I talked about in the blog post, I would take all my sentences, all my examples would be from persuasive writing. And I try to also use the students' interest and things I know could possibly make them giggle, and have them work on those mechanics through that. So they're, again, building confidence and familiarity, like schema for what that writing's supposed to sound like. And then it also it's cool because you get wait a minute, we just did this in writing workshop today. So they think it's magic that like all these things are coming together. Which is powerful, because then they really remember what you're
right. So instead of having like isolated things that are just pulled from some other curriculum, actually try to line it up with what's happening.
As much as possible, given time.
Okay. Number 9.
So number 9 is sort of letting a student's creating. Number 9 is letting writing samples show a student's progress. So I sometimes say making their progress really visible. So as special educators often have to write kind of IEP or SMART style goals for students that they serve, and those they sound like the student will write 3 out of 5 sentences with correct punctuation and 80% accurate.
Yeah.
They're kind of technical sounding. And
Yeah.
I realize there's a push to progress monitoring and data collection and stuff like that. But I like to do this now. I like to show a student their progress by just sequencing all their drafts.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that's revision history, or I have them try to start new drafts sometimes, so that they can see where they started and where they were, the next month, and where they were the next week, and then we do reflection where we look at all those sequence drafts and talk about how they've grown as a writer. And that can be really specific, like, did you put periods in? Are you writing incomplete
Yeah.
sentences? And it can be also more, qualitative. But that it's just really powerful for the student to see their progress in that way.
Right.
And then they learn to articulate it, and then you can have them do it for their parents, and that's really
Oh,
awesome.
nice. Yeah.
When they can put 3 drafts of the same writing assignment in front of their parents and explain where they started and where they how they've grown, that's really awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That does sound really powerful. I like that idea. All right. Number 10.
So number 10 is about revision and editing, and it sort of goes back to that idea where less can sometimes be more. And I like to take students through a structured routine for looking at the mechanical aspects of writing, formatting, if it's research, are your citations correct, spelling, grammar, to take them and have them. I talk about the R's a lot. You have to reread several times.
Mm-hmm.
You have to revise. You have to revisit. You have to use the rubric, which hopefully we've developed with the students at this point, so that they kind of come up with a checklist of, okay, now I'm going to first read for spelling.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to do another read or revisit for comma usage, because we did a mini lesson on that. And let's see, if I'm using commas correctly.
Right.
And it just breaks it down. And I obviously wouldn't have them do the whole checklist in one writing workshop period. That's too much. Like, you kind of focus on one thing at a time. And if you can kind of make that process routine, the hope is that they sort of generalize it, so that when they're writing something for science class, they take the time to go through and read it a couple of times to check for those things before they turn it in. Or that's always the goal, at least.
That's the ideal, isn't it? Yeah, that they realize this is a transferable skill.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
and you had mentioned to me that well, actually, did you say this, that you have been using the single point rubric also?
Yes, I do. My really awesome partner and we just taught a reading and writing workshop summer class to 7th and 8th graders, where we have them go back through the many lessons we've gone through and develop the rubric with us. So if we worked on dialogue, what makes effective dialogue? And we go back, to all the mentor texts and the slides we used, and they have to flesh out that box of a single point rubric. And I also like to do, in terms of feedback, it's really cool then to take that rubric they developed and do peered feedback and rounds. And this also breaks down the editing process a little bit. So, maybe one person wants to be the dialogue expert, and all the papers cycle through that student, and he or she is just looking at dialogue, and are they, meeting the goals on that rubric that they came up with. So that can also be a cool, effective way to do it, with peers giving each other feedback.
Yeah.
On very specific focused elements of the writing, and not just like everything, which they get overwhelmed with.
It is. Yes, they do.
Yeah. One tip I just always do when editing is I always have like a station. We have a station or something I make students do one-on-one with me where we reread their writing from the bottom up.
Okay.
And what that does is it takes, you have sort of this memory of what you think you've said or what you wanted to say,
Mm-hmm.
and that sort of takes that away because you're just reading the sentence as it was written, and that's where you tend to notice a word is missing, there's a grammar mistake, or the sentence is too long to be a sentence. I've
Okay.
just found it's a good way to kind of work on sentence boundaries sometimes because it makes you read your writing one sentence at a time without that sort of memory for what you think is written there
Yeah.
taking over. Yeah.
So they're not
So,
actually reading it word for word backwards. They're taking
no,
the
no,
last
no.
sentence and reading
Last
that
sentence.
through, and then the one
Right.
before it go through. Okay. Okay.
Right.
I
Right.
think that's a good
Yeah.
trick. Yeah. Anything.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of having students read their stuff out loud. It's always just like
Mm-hmm.
you have to be able. So doing it backwards is another way to really, really
Yep.
notice things a little
Yep.
more.
Yep.
Okay. So before we do 11, because that's the last one, I'm going to go through the list one more time for people listening. We have number
Okay.
one, common planning time, two, equal partnership, three, reading student work together, four is practicing less is more, five is the use of models, six, use of word lists, seven is keeping everybody together as much as possible, keeping your kids with the learning differences in the room to participate as much as possible in the instruction. Number eight is letting the work that's happening in the ELA classroom guide the intervention that you do as a specialist.
Mm-hmm.
Nine is letting those writing samples sequentially show student progress. And number 10 is really prioritizing revision and editing as part of the whole process. So 11 is our last one. And what is our 11th tip?
So, this is something that I think about how some students really struggle with writing. I think, prolific readers or students who have this sort of perfect storm combination of maybe some anxiety and some perfectionism and some maybe some ADHD, where they just get so stuck with
Mm,
kind of their idea of what they want it to sound like and
mm-hmm.
getting started and how to get it out, how to
Yeah.
say it, and then they sometimes can tend to procrastinate, and then
Yep.
they're the ones up late at night before the papers due having a breakdown at home. So I like to work with the ELA teacher with those students. I think specific models. So going back to number four, like, they want to be able to write. My example in the blog post is Harry Potter. Let's look at a opening scene from Harry Potter and kind of analyze what the author did there, and then can that help them move forward in terms of
Right.
how they write their opening scene, and then um, showing them the timeline of their drafts, really good for
Mm-hmm.
them because it's that growth mindset and progress, like shows them their progress, and then just trying to kind of get them comfortable with the idea that you're never comfortable as a writer. You're supposed to feel like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, I've taught, now I work more with high school students. I will, like, literally, I feel like I'm doing therapy with them where I'll teach them to say, like, wow, I hate this sentence, but I can go back later and fix it, just because we got to get something done and get it on the
Yeah.
page and move forward. So,
You know what, for
yeah.
me, I think also helped a lot with this too is that I would try pretty regularly to write my own drafts with them for
Mm-hmm.
an assignment that we were
Mm-hmm.
doing, and I would do that in front of them, and and they
Yes.
would see the really, really ugly early phase
Yes.
of that so that they can see that nothing comes out of a person's brain perfectly formed. It really,
Absolutely. Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
takes a lot
And
of
I
trust.
like doing that too. And you can go back to it and, like, 2 weeks later, you have a good idea where you could model
Yeah.
how to change something, or if you thought of a different way to say something. So,
So they can
yeah,
see that whole
absolutely.
process. Yeah. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for sharing
Thank
all these
you.
ideas. I feel like this is going to be super helpful to people, like I was saying, on both sides of this partnership. So, you've got this all laid out in a blog post, and if people have questions, they can go there and ask them and continue the conversation. But if somebody were to just look for you online, where would they go?
So I can link to the blog post. I'll send you I'm on Twitter, but my Twitter account's pretty sparse. I basically retweet things like
Yeah.
what you post. And then, let's see, I have LinkedIn, and then I can actually link, I've had some blog posts I've written for my school's blog, and they can find my contact information there if anybody wants to reach out.
Well, and also on your author page, there's going to be, links to your Twitter and your LinkedIn there too, so that people can just come to the site and find you there. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
To read Sarah's blog post about this topic, visit cultofpedagogy.com, click podcast, and choose episode 173. To get a weekly email from me about my newest blog posts, podcast episodes, courses, and products, sign up for my mailing list at cultofpedagogy.com/subscribe. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great day.